A well-known tech entrepreneur walking home through an upscale Toronto neighborhood, shot dead in cold blood. No warning, no robbery, no known enemies. Just a sudden execution-style hit on a quiet spring night. The killer vanished within seconds. The case remains unsolved. Matthew Staikos wasn't just anybody. He was a 37-year-old CEO, a Canadian tech visionary, and by all accounts, someone with no known ties to anything shady. So how did his life end on the sidewalk in one of the safest parts of the city? There were no final words, no demands, no second chances. Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we untangle the life and death of Matthew Staikos and try to figure out what most likely happened. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there. On the evening of May 28, 2018, Matthew Staikos, a 37-year-old Canadian tech entrepreneur, sat down for a late business dinner in Yorkville, a well-known upscale district in central Toronto. The area is known for its designer boutiques, quiet tree-lined streets, and high-end restaurants, not for violent crime. By most accounts, it was a normal spring night, unremarkable, except for what was about to unfold. After finishing their meal, Matthew and a colleague stepped out onto Yorkville Avenue just after 11:30 p.m. The streets were quiet. Few pedestrians lingered that late on a Monday. Not far away, a grey Mercedes sedan had been idling. Moments after the two men began walking, the car sprang into motion. A man exited from the passenger side, quickly advanced toward them from behind, and without exchanging a word, opened fire. It was fast, efficient, and devastating. Nearby residents heard a burst of gunfire and immediately dialed 911. Within minutes, first responders were on the scene. Matthew lay collapsed on the sidewalk, gravely injured. Despite emergency efforts, he was pronounced dead where he fell. His colleague, though shaken, was physically unharmed. The shooter had already vanished, re-entering the Mercedes and disappearing into the city streets before police arrived. The location was Yorkville Avenue, a central artery in one of Toronto's safest and most affluent zones. That night, it became the site of the city's 36th homicide of the year, and one of its most confounding. As police launched an investigation, what stood out immediately was the precision. There was no indication of a robbery, no confrontation, and no delay. Just a clean, quick ambush. Early the next morning, Toronto police began combing through surveillance footage and canvassing the neighborhood. What they found confirmed the professionalism of the hit. Cameras had captured blurry images of a silver four-door Mercedes speeding away from the area. Witness descriptions of the shooter were vague. A black male, around 5'10", medium build, dressed inconspicuously. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. It didn't take long for investigators to call it a targeted killing. We say it's a targeted homicide because the person that took his life purposely took his life, said Detective Sergeant Terry Brown, one of the lead investigators. The manner of the shooting, the presence of a getaway driver, the lack of any theft, all pointed in one direction. This was an execution, not a random act. But within that certainty was a troubling unknown. Who ordered it, and why? Detectives admitted early on that they couldn't say with total confidence that Matthew had even been the intended target. "We're not 100% sure," Brown told reporters. "It's possible the shooter mistakenly shot the wrong person." That line of thinking would hang over the case for years. If Matthew wasn't the intended victim, who was? And if he was, what possible motive could there be? In the days that followed, police held press conferences, shared security footage, and described the murder as an unprovoked attack on a defenseless man. Public appeals were launched, hoping someone might recognize the car, the shooter, or even come forward anonymously. But no tip cracked the case. For George Staikos, Matthew's older brother, the killing came with no context. "It was a huge shock to us. We never would have expected that," he told reporters. George and Matthew had once been business partners, co-founding a web browser years earlier that they eventually sold to BlackBerry. While George had since moved on to new ventures, Matthew continued building in the tech world, launching a social networking startup called Vlipo. Friends and family described him as a kind, brilliant, and generous man. He was well-liked, well-connected, and seemingly well out of harm's way. Despite being a very physically fit big guy, he was a very soft and gentle person, George recalled. Always there for people. He certainly had lots of friends and liked to enjoy life. There was nothing, at least publicly, in Matthew's history that hinted at danger. To the Staikos family, the police investigation wasn't moving fast enough. Within weeks, they began seeking outside help. They hired David Perry, a retired homicide detective turned private investigator who had experience handling sensitive and high-profile cases. Perry began working the case alongside his team, bringing an independent eye to the evidence. His conclusion mirrored the official stance, but with a twist. Matthew did not fit any kind of scenario or profile, Perry said. He was the last guy you'd expect would be the victim of a homicide. The case stalled. Leads dried up. No suspect was identified. No arrests were made. 3 years later, in 2021, the family took matters further. George announced a private reward of $250,000 for any information that could identify the killer. It was one of the largest private rewards in Canadian history. "We need closure," George said at a press event. "We are not going to let this go." The reward stood for a year. No credible tips came in. Undeterred, the family renewed the $250,000 offer in early 2023. This time, their public statement made the pain more visible. "Every day has been excruciating," they wrote. "We hope $250,000 will be enough. That someone who knows something will want to do the right thing." Despite the time, the money, and the media coverage, nothing broke the silence. Behind the scenes, Toronto police confirmed that the case remained open. Not cold, but unsolved. In official language, they still classified it as active and claimed to be one tip away from making progress. But for the public and the Staikos family, it was hard to tell how close they really were. In 2025, a quiet update added a new wrinkle. Detective Sergeant Steve Smith, now with the Cold Case Unit, gave a rare interview in which he suggested a possible motive. There were some complex dealings, cryptocurrency and the like. "We think that played a role, as did his personal relationships," he said. It was the first time investigators publicly hinted at a financial dimension to the crime. The comment raised as many questions as it answered. What kind of dealings? Who were they with? And were they directly connected to Matthew or someone close to him? Still, it was the most specific lead police had ever shared. Privately, it was known that Matthew had continued working on various ventures in the tech space. He had business relationships across North America and beyond. He had been part of early tech exits, and his new project, Vlipo, aimed to be a mobile-first social platform. Like many entrepreneurs, he moved in fast circles, often raising capital, dealing with partners, and experimenting with emerging technologies. One of those was cryptocurrency. Whether Matthew was heavily involved in crypto deals or simply adjacent to them has never been confirmed. But by mentioning it publicly, Detective Sergeant Smith indicated investigators had seen enough to consider it relevant. Meanwhile, online speculation grew. Reddit threads, amateur sleuth forums, and independent blogs picked up the case. Some posts theorized about international money laundering. Others suggested personal betrayal. A few went far off track, accusing public figures with no basis. None of these ideas were backed by evidence, and most were dismissed by police. What remained, both in public statements and in investigative focus, was a simple but chilling narrative. Someone planned the murder. Someone provided the vehicle. Someone pulled the trigger. And someone, likely more than one person, knows exactly why. Even years later, private investigator David Perry stood by the theory of coordination. At least one person, the driver of that silver Mercedes, knows who shot Matthew, he said. And it's very likely others in the community have knowledge too. For the Staikos family, the lack of closure has been a long, unbearable wait. Every year that passes without an arrest is another year of questions unanswered. Yet even with that silence, the facts remain stark. A man exited a restaurant after dinner. He was followed and killed in seconds. The shooter escaped. And despite years of investigation, hundreds of interviews and a $250,000 reward, no one has ever been brought to justice. The void left behind is more than emotional. It's investigative. Without a clear motive or suspect, the case sits in limbo. A calculated killing in one of the safest cities in North America, committed without apparent cause, and remembered for what it never provided: a why. In the aftermath of Matthew Staikos' death, theories emerged almost immediately. Some came from law enforcement, others from the public, and a few bubbled up from online communities. While their complexity varied, they all attempted to answer the same question. Why would someone go to the trouble of orchestrating such a precise and public assassination? A random killing. One of the earliest explanations proposed by members of the public, and quickly ruled out by investigators, was that the shooting may have been a random act. Could this have been a mugging gone wrong, or a thrill killing by someone seeking notoriety? There are cities where that might seem plausible, but not this city and not this victim. Yorkville is not known for late-night violence. Even Toronto police emphasized the rarity of such an incident happening in that particular area. There was no indication of an attempted robbery. Matthew wasn't approached for money, nor were there any demands made before shots were fired. In fact, there was no interaction at all between him and the gunman. "There's nothing to suggest this was a robbery," said Detective Sergeant Terry Brown. "The individual approached him, shot him, and left. There was no attempt to take anything. That's not a random act." The method also contradicts the profile of a disorganized or impulsive attack. The shooter had a getaway car waiting. He executed the hit and exited the scene in a matter of seconds. These are not the actions of someone out looking for random violence. They suggest planning. Still, in the early hours, before the facts became clear, the theory that this could have been a spontaneous act briefly floated in public discourse. Once the surveillance footage and ballistic evidence confirmed the deliberate nature of the crime, this explanation lost its footing. Mistaken identity. Another widely discussed theory, one that even investigators themselves have acknowledged, is that Matthew may not have been the intended target at all. Instead, the gunman could have been looking for someone else, someone who looked similar, or who was meant to be in that location at that time. This angle gained traction due to the apparent lack of motive. Police had found nothing in Matthew's background to suggest he was involved in any criminal dealings or disputes that might explain why someone would want him dead. He had no known enemies. He wasn't facing lawsuits. There were no signs of personal vendettas. It simply didn't add up. If someone had said to us before this happened, "Name 10 people you think could ever be the victim of a homicide," Matthew wouldn't be on the list, his brother George Staikos told reporters. That sentiment was echoed by others in his circle. Detective Sergeant Brown added further ambiguity when he admitted, "We're not entirely certain he was the target. There is a possibility that the wrong person was killed." That statement, though careful, acknowledged what some had feared, that Matthew's death could have been the result of bad information or a tragic misidentification. Professional assassinations occasionally make this kind of error. A hitman is hired, given minimal intel, maybe a description, a location, or a time, and something goes wrong. The wrong man walks out of the restaurant. The real target cancels. A case of right place, wrong time. But that theory, while logistically possible, has its gaps. For one, Matthew was accompanied that night. His colleague, walking right beside him, was unharmed. If the shooter was unclear about who the intended victim was, why not hesitate? Why not engage both? Moreover, no other individual fitting the location, time, and description has been identified as a potential target. The theory remains open, but without a clear alternate victim, it's mostly a theory of elimination, a placeholder in the absence of hard motive. A personal dispute or grudge. Another category of speculation involves personal relationships. The idea that someone with a grudge, jealousy, or emotional score to settle arranged for Matthew's death. This might involve an ex-partner, a former friend, or a betrayed associate. Unlike the mistaken identity theory, this angle assumes Matthew was specifically chosen, not by accident, but by personal intent. But there's a problem with this narrative. There's no evidence of such a conflict. David Perry, the private investigator hired by the Staikos family, was clear in his assessment. "We looked closely at his life," Perry said in a radio interview. "He wasn't involved in any kind of risky behavior. No affairs, no debts, no criminal connections. That angle just doesn't hold water. If someone in Matthew's life had reason to want him gone, they've never made themselves known. Police have uncovered no restraining orders, no threatening messages, no history of harassment. That's not to say such a motive is impossible. Many murderers have killed over perceived slights that never made it into public records, but without supporting evidence, it's a stretch. There's also the style of the attack. A personal vendetta often leads to emotional, messy crimes. This one was anything but. No confrontation, no hesitation, just a quick, professional strike. Not the kind of execution typically born of romantic bitterness or wounded pride. A financial motive, crypto, debt, or fraud. A theory that has gained quiet traction, particularly in recent years, is the idea that Matthew Staikos was killed over a financial dispute. In 2025, Detective Sergeant Steve Smith gave the first concrete clue about what might have motivated the killing. There were some complex dealings, cryptocurrency and the like. "We think that played a role, as did his personal relationships," he said. That was the first and only time police hinted at a motive grounded in money. If true, this theory suggests that Matthew may have found himself tangled, knowingly or unknowingly, in a financial conflict with serious consequences. Cryptocurrency, in particular, has been a magnet for both legitimate investors and bad actors. It moves across borders, lacks oversight, and has led to both windfalls and ruin. Some believe the motive wasn't about Matthew himself, but about someone close to him. A business partner, an investor, or even a friend. If money was lost, or if someone felt deceived or betrayed in a deal, a violent resolution might have been plotted. In such a scenario, Matthew could have been viewed as either a target of revenge or collateral damage. However, there's been no public confirmation of which deal or financial arrangement may have triggered such a response. The lack of named suspects or specific amounts leaves this theory in the realm of suggestion, stronger than rumor, but not yet proof. It's also worth noting that Detective Smith was cautious in how he framed the statement. "We think that played a role," he said. Not a certainty, but a working theory. Some critics have pointed out that if cryptocurrency really was involved, one might expect digital traces, blockchain records, wallet addresses, or transactions, but these have not been made public. It's possible the evidence exists and is being kept under wraps, or it's possible the motive lies deeper within private communications that investigators have yet to uncover. An elaborate conspiracy or cover-up. In the vacuum of confirmed suspects, more speculative theories took hold online. Reddit threads, web sleuth forums, and social media posts have floated everything from government involvement to celebrity ties. One user alleged that a well-known Toronto rapper had something to do with the murder, a claim entirely unsupported by evidence, but widely shared for its sensationalism. Others speculated about espionage, corporate sabotage, or secretive tech disputes involving proprietary code or sensitive information. These ideas usually cite Matthew's background in software and his success as a tech entrepreneur. Could he have developed something someone else wanted? Could his murder be connected to intellectual property? None of these angles have ever been endorsed by authorities. No classified data has surfaced. No business rivalries have been revealed. Toronto police have remained publicly silent on these theories. When asked about broader conspiracies, an investigator simply stated, "We focus on evidence, not speculation." To date, no whistleblower or insider has come forward to support any of these claims. Not every killing comes with a clear message. Some unfold in chaos, others in warning. But the murder of Matthew Staikos felt different from the start. Neither messy nor emotional, but tight, cold, and finished in seconds. That kind of precision doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. The simplest explanation, and the one that aligns most closely with the available facts, is that Matthew was targeted over money. Not as a rival, not as a criminal, but as a variable in a financial equation someone wanted to erase. To understand why this fits, it helps to look not at what happened, but at what didn't. There was no struggle, no theft, no interaction at all. The person who pulled the trigger didn't linger. That's not someone seeking revenge or validation. That's someone completing a task. The shooter's silence tells us he wasn't the one with the motive, just the one who was paid. From there, the logic extends outward. If a contract was involved, someone must have believed they had something significant to lose or gain. Not over petty cash, but something serious enough to justify a hit. The fact that the method was so calculated only reinforces that. This wasn't desperation, it was decision. The backdrop matters here. Matthew operated in a world where deals happen quietly, wealth moves fast, and conflicts often unfold in closed rooms. Tech startups, private funding rounds, digital assets, these don't always come with clear contracts or clean exits. Especially when cryptocurrency enters the picture, financial lines can blur quickly. It's an environment that rewards innovation, but also creates volatility, and in some cases, enemies. Importantly, nothing suggests Matthew himself did anything wrong. That's what makes this likely scenario even more devastating. That he may have been targeted not for who he was, but because of who he was linked to. Someone in his orbit, a business partner, an investor, even a friend, may have triggered a situation that spiraled beyond control. And when pressure mounted, Matthew was the most reachable link in the chain. This would also explain the silence afterward. No demands, no claims, just disappearance. The absence of a message often is the message. That the act itself was the goal, whether to settle a dispute, eliminate a threat, or close a door. And yet, despite this clarity in method, the case remains unsolved. That in itself is telling. When crimes are driven by personal anger, people talk, regret leaks, bragging slips out. But when multiple individuals are involved in a paid killing, and no one says a word, it usually means they're experienced, well compensated, or afraid. Statements from investigators over time have hinted at their own quiet conclusion. Phrases like complex dealings and mentions of digital assets weren't offered lightly. While they've stopped short of naming names, it's clear they followed financial leads and likely narrowed the pool of interest. One detective even alluded to the role of personal relationships within that context, which subtly suggests that proximity, not notoriety, is where the motive lies. What this theory doesn't require is just as important. It doesn't need mistaken identity or public grudges or elaborate conspiracies involving public figures or shadowy tech secrets. It only needs one thing: a person with something to lose and the means to remove what they saw as the obstacle. In a world where digital wallets can hold millions and trust can vanish in minutes, that motive is not far-fetched. It's common. Even the logistics of the killing reinforce this reading. The gunman struck at night, during a quiet window, in a low-traffic zone, after what was likely routine surveillance. The car was waiting. The approach was from behind. No forensic trail was left. None of this looks like personal rage. All of it looks like planning. As for why the case remains unsolved, it's worth remembering that professional jobs are hard to crack. The car may have been untraceable, the weapon disposable, the killer imported, and the one who ordered it perhaps never present at all. The longer it goes unsolved, the more it suggests experience and silence, not luck. The tragedy is that Matthew Staikos may never have seen it coming. All signs suggest he wasn't hiding, wasn't paranoid, and had no reason to suspect he was in danger. That's what makes this theory so plausible and so devastating. It's not a story about a man with enemies. It's about a man who became useful to someone else, only in death. There may never be a confession. No courtroom may ever hear the full version of what happened that night. But by following the facts and stripping away the noise, this is where the logic leads. Matthew was eliminated by people who viewed him as an obstacle in a financial crisis, not because he posed a threat, but because his removal served a purpose. Whether that purpose was revenge, protection, or greed, only one thing remains certain. It wasn't personal, it was business.